Hello to all of you attending today, and happy Earth Day, the 50th annual Earth Day. Welcome to our presentation, COVID-19 and Climate Change, Two Sides of the Same Coin. My name is David Whitehead. I'm representing the Nevada County chapter of Citizens Climate Education and Citizens Climate Lobby. And we're joined today by the Sacramento chapter as our two chapters co-sponsor our first event together. Thank you to all of the Sacramento chapter volunteers, as well as the many Nevada County chapter members in the Zoom audience today. Welcome to all of you. CCL seeks to build political will for solutions to climate change. We advocate for significant reductions in carbon emissions and work for solutions directed at those most at risk in our society from climate impacts. Our nonpartisan activism includes both education for our communities as well as a presence in our local congressional district offices and on Capitol Hill. We host educational events like this one so that informed people will build political will, thereby increasing the chances that our country will take serious action on climate. We support current legislation, HR 763, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which currently has 81 sponsors in the House of Representatives. Well, today we're pleased to have two noted environmental scientists, two big thinkers on the subject of climate change, Dr. Tom Suchanek from UC Davis and Mr. Dana Nuccitelli of Yale Climate Connections. They will address the complexities and similarities both of the COVID-19 pandemic and global climate change, as well as available solutions. And we're going to have three separate video presentations. Parts 1 and 2 will feature Dr. Suchanek from UC Davis. Part 1, COVID-19 and climate change, two sides of the same coin, will present scientific comparisons of these two crises. Part 2 will cover the scientific and technological solutions to climate change. Finally, Mr. Nuccitelli will present Part 3, legislative and market-based solutions to climate change. After the three presentations, we will have a question and answer period with our Zoom audience. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tom Suchanek, a marine ecologist who received his PhD from the University of Washington in Seattle. He's been studying the impacts of a wide variety of environmental contaminants for the past 40 years, but over the past 20 years, he's focused on the greatest long-term threat to human civilization, CO2-caused climate change. So without further ado, I invite Dr. Suchanek to give us part 1 of this three-part presentation. Tom?
Thank you, David. I appreciate that introduction. I would also like to thank Lou Sitzer from the Nevada County Media Center for the original invitation to give this presentation. And as you can see, I'm presenting from my home office today, doing my part to be a diligent, health-conscious citizen, protecting all of you from further exposures and providing a carbon-free presentation. I'd like to share with all of you some of my observations I have made over the striking similarities between the ongoing COVID-19 virus pandemic and our ongoing fight against climate change. This presentation will also be archived on the Nevada County Media website and through a link on my website, tomsuchanek.net/COVID, so it can be viewed on any future date as well. So let's move ahead with our evaluation of these two global crises. All right, so this is the first of three presentations, COVID-19 and climate change, two sides of the same coin. And I'm going to ask you all, should we be scared? Well, I think we should be scared. This is a very tumultuous time. And people are isolated in their homes. They have a fear of contracting the virus. There's concern for their elderly parents in nursing homes or assisted living facilities. Many are out of a job. They have little or no money for food. They stand in lines where 50,000 people are trying to get food. And their kids are driving them crazy at home. So we need to really take this very seriously. And so I just wanted to start with a little note from Ben, this little 8-year-old who's being homeschooled. It's not going well. It's not going good. My mom's getting stressed out. My mom's really getting confused. we took a break so my mom can figure this stuff out. And I'm telling you, it is not going good. And I suspect this is happening in many, many households around the country. Not ours, because our kids are already out of the nest, but in many, many households, I'm sure it's really tough to balance all those things, especially if one is a provider, healthcare provider, or other types. So here's the two global crises that we need to deal with, we need to get urgent solutions for. Part one is the COVID-19 and climate change, two sides of the same coin. Part two is scientific and technological solutions to climate change. Part three will be legislative and market-based solutions to climate change. And you can move from one to the next at your convenience. So let's start. We have two invisible enemies here that are just operating on different timescales, and we need to deal with them in much the same way. Neither one of them can we detect using normal human senses of sight, smell, taste, or touch. In the case of COVID-19 on the left, it's a virus, it's a biological agent. It's extremely contagious. It's spread by humans, and it operates on a time frame of days to weeks to months. On the right, climate change initiated by carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases is a chemical agent. Very powerful heat trapping gas. It's also spread by humans, but it operates on a time scale of months to years to decades. So let's take a look at them. For both, they're rapidly increasing at exponential rates. COVID-19, as of March 22nd, there was about almost 35,000 cases in the US, and 5 days later, there was 86,000 cases, almost 87,000 cases. And 12 days later, even still, we had 400 and whatever thousand cases. I can't quite see it on my screen. So let's take a look at climate change and the emissions of carbon dioxide. This is the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere on the left. And on the bottom, this is the last 1,000 years. And for the last 1,000 years, it's been bumping along at about 280 parts per million in the atmosphere until we reached the Industrial Revolution. At that point, we started burning fossil fuels. That is coal first, and then oil and gas. Those fossil fuels are heat trapping gases, and they started capturing the CO2 in the atmosphere, and that started increasing higher and higher to 415 parts per million, and that started warming the Earth. 415 parts per million is not anything special number. It's just indicating that we're moving fast and going up and up and up and at an exponential rate. So let's take a look at some of the things of what these represent. They both represent a human physical and psychological health issue, a societal instability issue, an economic security issue, a national security issue, an environmental impacts issue, and unfortunately, also a political issue. So the world says, there's no way we can shut everything down in order to lower emissions, slow climate change, and protect the environment. And Mother Nature responds, here's a virus, go practice. And that's exactly what we're doing now. We're practicing containing and squashing this virus in much the same way that we need to deal with climate change. So let's look at the comparisons we have. So unfortunately, this is how some people think about COVID-19 and climate change. Many of them don't understand it. They either don't recognize it or don't understand what the scientists are telling them, and they want to ignore it many times. They just stick their head in the sand and try to ignore it. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. So on the left, we have a COVID example. Many of these people are ignoring what the officials are telling them. And this went on even as far as April 2nd, before Florida's governor closed the beaches where these people couldn't congregate. And many of them were spreading the virus because you don't have to have symptoms to have the virus be a part of where you are. So on the right, we have some climate deniers are also ignoring and actually actively working against it. Wayne Weeks is one of those who wrote a book, The Global Warming Climate Change Hoax. And this is what comes from many of the deniers, is an ability to just deny and exclude all evidence that's provided by government scientists or academic scientists on what the problem is. So let's look back in 2017. The Smithsonian magazine put out an article about the Spanish flu 100 years ago. And that Spanish flu was in 1918. It infected 500 million people, which was about 1/3 of the population of the Earth at that time, and it killed 50 million. That's a 10% mortality rate. They gave warnings about upcoming pandemics, and unfortunately, those warnings were not very well heeded. The Obama administration actually provided information on a warning about an upcoming or projected pandemic to the Trump administration, but this crisis probably shouldn't have happened because nothing was done in the meantime to bolster up our preparedness to face something like this. Now we're still dealing with how to best act on the COVID virus, and we're gaining progress, but it's still a slow slog right now. So let's take a look at some of the impacts from the COVID-19 virus. Sickness and death as of April 10th. We're looking here at global totals, 1.6 million cases and about 100,000 deaths globally, worldwide. And similarly, global daily new cases. The United States seems to be leading the pack on this graph going up here, much, much higher than all other countries in the globe. So looking down here at the United States has the most reported coronaviruses as of the, April 9th. And very, very clear that we're leading the pack. And then I updated one slide here to look at April 16th, which the US cases are now at 671,000, and we're over 34,000 deaths in the United States. So let's look at what some of these impacts are. The economic impacts from COVID are completely involving instability and volatility, especially in the marketplace. Here's the Dow Jones Industrial Average since 2016, rising, 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 and then a huge dump on March 16th, which was the largest point drop in history, almost 3,000 points in one day. Then the very next week, we had the largest point gain in history, almost a little over 2,000 points in that next week. Those are unprecedented, and it shows the volatility and instability in the market. Also, we have the biggest stimulus or relief package in history, $2.2 trillion on March the 25th, and we have more. Congress is looking at more stimulus and relief packages now. So let's look at unemployment, another volatile situation and unstable situation. This is again 1967 through 2020, and we have unemployment claims in the U.S. economy. On 3/26, there was 3.3 million claims. On a week later, we had an additional 6.6 million claims. On a week after that, we had another 6.6 million claims. And another week after that, we had another 5.2 million claims, bringing that total unemployment claims up to 22 million. So what the economists are projecting now is they believe that our unemployment rate might reach 17% by June or July of this year. So we'll see how accurate they are. So here's a grocery store in my neighborhood. We're looking at some of those psychological effects we talked about, getting cabin fever, causing instability, which causes then anxiety and fear and panic and hoarding. It's happening right here in my neighborhood. This whole entire side of the store is empty. No paper products whatsoever, no paper towels, no tissues, no toilet paper. And I'm not sure what's going on with toilet paper. US seems to be hoarding toilet paper. Other countries seem to be hoarding yeast to grow bread, or rise bread, or pizzas or whatever they have to eat. And our country is hoarding toilet paper. And this is the kind of result we're getting. Many people's panic rooms might look like this now. So, and also this event, this COVID pandemic, is creeping into the art world. Probably many of you know the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, consisting of conquest, war, famine, and death. So this is the way that artists looked in the painting looked in the 1800s, and this is how we address that now. Seriously? Okay, it's the same thing. The United States is doing something really weird here. Okay, let's take a look at some of the impacts from climate change. We've got extreme temperature fluctuations. We have extreme snowpack fluctuations where it's, no snow one year and then 180% of average the next year. We've got extreme weather in storms, winds, tornadoes, hurricanes, causing extreme floods. Then we have extreme droughts, which dries out everything to a tinder, which then from a lightning strike or anything else causes extreme fires, which then causes the vegetation to be gone, loosening up the roots base of the plants and exposing the soil, which then causes extreme mudslides. In addition, we have rapid sea level rise. We're going to talk about some of these issues in a little while. Increasing El Nino events, which affect our fisheries, increasing seasonality changes, both in the ocean as well as on land, and rapidly rising ocean acidification, which prevents organisms from taking out the carbonate ions out of the ocean to build their shells. And we have increasing extinction rates. We're losing about 200 species per day, not all from climate change, but it's a great contributor to that, which is about 1,000 to 10,000 times higher than we've seen with natural background rates. Then we have some scientists who are concerned that we may be entering the 6th mass global extinction, where we lose 90% of our species. So we have all these concerns, and some scientists are even concerned about increases in communicable diseases from climate change in many different situations, which we don't have time to talk about today. However, what we're seeing is extreme and unpredictable events in all of these different factors. And we're seeing them daily. They're no longer in the future where we're looking to 2100 or something that's the deadline. No, we're experiencing them all the time. In fact, right now, as we're going through the COVID virus pandemic, we are experiencing those kinds of events that are listed here. There's a 10-degree increase in temperatures on the West Coast. There's flooding in the mid-country. There's tornadoes in the south, which are moving up the East Coast and flooding areas up there as well. So this is happening every day. We just don't see as much of it in the news because COVID is taking up all the oxygen. So now we have oxygen and carbon dioxide to worry about. So, okay. So let's take a look at what's driving this climate change process here. And I think I'd like to get make sure everybody's on the same page before we go start talking about carbon dioxide much. So here's the natural greenhouse effect. The sun beats down on the earth absorbs some of that heat, and some of it's reflected back up into the atmosphere. But in the meantime, we've got greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, N2O, and methane, CH4, which are heat trapping gases, and they are warming our Earth. If we didn't have that, the Earth would be ice. Let's look at the human enhanced greenhouse effect. Instead, we have the sun similarly beating down on the Earth, heating up the Earth some, and then re-radiating back into space, some of that. But because we've produced more CO2, more methane, and N2O, nitrous oxide, into the atmosphere, that's heating our Earth even more. So that's the basis of what's happening. And we're going to focus primarily on CO2 this time. So here's a graph with temperature on the left and carbon dioxide concentrations on the right. So this is right after the Industrial Revolution, right about the early 1800s. We started seeing, and the orange is the carbon dioxide increase over time. And here we started measuring it in earnest, 1958. And this is the actual data rates here, and going up to 415 parts per million again. Again, not a special number, but means we're really high. And the temperature is more variable here. We have more data on that, and it's bouncing around, but it's also very closely correlated with what's happening with the carbon dioxide, increasing, going towards an exponential increase. So this is the basis of what we're dealing with. So the last time CO2 concentrations were 415 parts per million, humans didn't even exist. That was 800,000 to 20 million years ago. And at that time, global temperatures were substantially higher. There was almost no ice on the planet, and sea level was about 100 foot higher than it is now. So let's look at this heating up of the globe. Here's the hottest 10 years on record globally. And what we're seeing is, here's 2019. It's not quite the hottest year, but it's the second hottest year. And what we do see is that the last 6 years are the hottest 6 years. So it's apparent that we're getting hotter and hotter, faster and faster. So let's take a look at what's happening now in 2020. 2020, January was the hottest January ever on record. And our February in this year was the second hottest February on record. So we're getting hotter, and each month is breaking records of heat as well. So we need to slow this down. And the heat is causing droughts. So here is a graph from the Palmer Hydrological Drought Index from 1890 to 2018. And we have in this quadrant here, this sector, we have mild droughts. Here we have moderate droughts at this level, severe droughts at this level, and extreme droughts at this level. Well, it's pretty obvious to see that droughts are, even though they're highly variable and unpredictable, they are getting worse and worse all the time down to extreme drought. Well, they ran out of categories down here, so the people at the Palmer Hydrological Drought Index had to actually create a new category for these exceptional droughts that have occurred in 2018 and beyond. So now they have another metric to use for describing the hottest of the exceptional droughts. And the droughts are causing things to be very tinder dry and causing wildfires. Here's a graph for the number of fires larger than 1,000 acres on US Forest Service land. So we're looking at from 1970 through 2010s. And if you look down in the 1970s, we're not seeing much in the way of abundance of large, greater than 1,000 fires, 1,000 acre fires. Here's the average for those going up and up and up. But as you look towards the present, you're seeing, again, high variability in those years, but you're also seeing an increase over time in all of those more and more frequent 1,000 fires, 1,000 acre fires. And that also means that the California fire season has also increased by about 75 days across the Sierra Nevada. That's both before and after the normal fire season. So we're seeing them expanding in both directions. And we're not alone. The Amazon rainforest here in Brazil in 2019, which supplies about 20% of our Earth's oxygen, which we breathe, obviously, had over 74,000 fires. Huge, enormous fires. Obviously we see from space on satellite photographs, but that was 80% higher number of fires than they had in 2018. So it's getting worse, and the heat is enhancing that. Unfortunately, the president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, refused to accept any help from neighboring countries or even the US in terms of putting out those fires. And that may have been based on economic aspects of what they want to do with their land after it's cleared. But that's a whole different topic. So we also have bigger tornado outbreaks. Here's the number, and the largest outbreaks is increasing from 1950 to 2017. And this is the average line here, the white line. And again, it's variable, but it's going up and up, and it's getting more extreme as we move towards the present. Other kinds of impacts. Also, obviously, we're having hurricanes. We're not necessarily experiencing a greater number of hurricanes, but the hurricanes that we are experiencing tend to be more fierce and causing more damage. So we're getting Cat 5 hurricanes, Cat 5, Cat 5, Cat 5. Here's Jose was a Cat 4, but Maria was Cat 5, Irma was a Cat 5, and the latest one showed us that many of these hurricanes are stalling. They're not moving very fast. And if they stay in one place, some of them are moving at like 1 mile an hour. And that's causing huge amounts of damage. If the winds are 180 to 200 miles an hour, the people and buildings can't sustain that for very long. So they're causing more damage. It's just that they're not being more frequent. So let's look at sort of a gestalt view of this. This is a map of the United States in 2018, the billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. So in the West, you have fires. Sort of in the middle of the country, you have hailstones, and you have tornadoes in the South. We have hurricanes there. We have flooding in the East. So all of these events were greater than $1 billion. That's for 2018. Let's look at 2019, the same sort of thing. We had, again, billion-dollar disasters, fires in the West, hailstones, flooding in the middle, tornadoes, lightning strikes, and then again, hurricanes. All of these billion-dollar disasters. So these are things that cost money and also human lives. So we have to start slowing this process down. And I think this is a good time for a little climate candor here. Only in America do we accept weather predictions from a rodent, but deny climate change evidence from scientists. Sometimes that's the way it feels, unfortunately. So next, let's talk a little bit about some of the other consequences of climate change. That would be sea level rise. So here we've got a 2,500-year record. And looking back, this is the height of the sea or anomalous areas. And this is the oceans, the black line is the mean of the ocean level going up and down. And we've got up until, again, we have the Industrial Revolution right here. And then right after the Industrial Revolution started with burning coal, oil, and gas, we start seeing that climbing up, not just to this level, but higher and higher and higher, exponentially higher, until we get some of the extreme events that we're experiencing now. Global mean sea level has risen about 7 to 8 inches since 1900. And it also has risen about 3 inches since 1993, which is much quicker. So how is this sea level rise caused? Well, about 50% of sea level rise is caused from the melting of glaciers and ice caps. And we'll take a look a little bit of that in a minute. About another 50% is caused from seawater expansion. Now, it's hard to believe that seawater would expand that much to really cause the entire globe to have higher sea levels, but it is true. That's what's happening. There's other factors involved, subsidence and plate movements, but these are the two main factors. So another 50% is, no, that's not right. Let me just continue on here. So with sea level rise comes threats to island nations. So here's a picture of the South Pacific area with many different populations here. I'll start with the Carteret Islands. Carteret Islands have about 2,000 residents, and they are already being affected by global sea level rise and destroying many of their villages. So they have made arrangements to move their populations over to the mainland of Papua New Guinea. Tuvalu is another population out there of about 10,000 people, and they have made arrangements to move their citizens to the South Island of New Zealand. The Kiribati or Kiribati Islands have more. They have 110,000 individual residents, which are now being dramatically affected by sea level rise. And they have negotiated with Fiji to go to some of their higher islands. This is happening all across the Pacific. These are only specific examples that I'm giving you. Even people on the shorelines are being affected. So up here is Shishmaref, Alaska, on the coast, and it includes Inupiaq Eskimo villages. And because the sea level, because the sea ice is melting, that normally protects them from ocean storms. Now those waves that are coming in from the storms are destroying their villages, and they are having to move inland to keep their villages safe. So let's look now at what's happening with geopolitical refugee migration. By 2050, we're expecting up to 140 million people to be migration refugees. That's just enormous. That's occurring in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. Let's take a look at a couple of examples that we know probably pretty well. Here's the lower boot of Florida. Florida has about 21 million residents. So keep your eye on this area of Florida. So 1, 2, 3, this is what's going to happen by 2050. And we may not see that end of Florida, which includes Miami area. So that's pretty dramatic. This is Shanghai. This is about the entire area of Shanghai, which has 26 million people. So watch this carefully. 1, 2, 3, Shanghai in 2050. It practically won't be there at all. So think about all those millions of people trying to find food and shelter, moving and migrating to other countries. This is the stuff of wars, and we are going to be experiencing this really soon, relatively speaking. So for both COVID and climate change, we need to use science-based approaches. We need to do research, collect data early. We need to develop models and predictions and projections of what's going to happen in the future so we can use the best tools we have to solve those problems. We need to test all the time. Right now, unfortunately, the US has only tested less than 1% of our COVID cases, or our individuals, to see if they have COVID. We also need to use all the tools in our toolbox, both for COVID as well as for climate change. And we all need to work together towards a common goal, both in terms of the United States nationally, and these are both global problems that we need to deal with on a global basis. We need to develop those solutions, and they're coming, but we just haven't gotten there yet on either one of them. And really, we're all in the same boat, we're all in the same canoe. So let's keep our nose to the grindstone and make sure that we incorporate science into both of these problems. So you've seen this graph before. This is the COVID graph that we don't want to peak too high. We need to bend that curve down. We need to stop the spread and get it down to a reasonable level where we can control it. So look at this graph, and then here's the other graph for COVID. This is the one from April 10th, where we had about 2,000 deaths per day in the United States. And here's the variance, or the variability of what the models are projecting as to how much we have in terms of deaths per day by April 12th. Now, by the time you see this, it's going to be April 22nd on Earth Day. This is where they expect the COVID deaths per day to be at. So we'll see what happens during that time. So here's this curve that we need to bend down. Look at the shape of that curve, and look at the shape of this curve. This is the curve for carbon dioxide emissions. So this is carbon dioxide emissions up here, 40 billion tons a year. And here, each one of these lines is a mathematical model output that tells us how we need to bring that curve down, stop the spread of carbon dioxide. So this black line from 1980 to 2010, or 2100, I'm sorry. This curve is increasing emissions up to where we are now in 2020. But if we started right here at the year 2000 to start reducing our emission output, that would be one of these lines here, and it would bring us down to a reasonable level where we need to be to fight climate change. We would have only needed to reduce our emissions by about 2% per year. However, we didn't do that. And of course, the emissions continue to rise continually up to where we are now at 2020. So what are we going to do? What happens if we do nothing? If we do nothing, this is what's going to happen. It's going to rise exponentially and keep going. So trust me, this is not a place that I would want to live in, and I suspect it's probably not one you would want to live in either. We need to stem this carbon dioxide output and bring it down to reality. So let's take a look back where we were before. So here's where we are now again. And if we start now, we could bend that curve down, but we would have to do that at a rate of about 5% per year instead of 2% per year. We're further along the curve here. So if we start now, we can hope to bring it down by 5%, but we're already into 2020, and that's not likely that we're going to bend this curve that fast. Now, each one of these dots is another year, so there's 10 dots there. That brings us to 2030. So if we just keep the concentration of carbon, or the emissions of carbon dioxide, at the same level for the next 10 years, that would mean that we would have to reduce carbon emissions by 9% per year, which is a phenomenally challenging process. So we have to figure out, excuse me, within the next 10 years, what we're going to do to bring that curve down, and to bring it down to where we aren't going to be experiencing these extreme events all the time, affecting both property and lives. All right, so part 2 of this series is the science of solutions to climate change. And I encourage you to look at part 2, because it will tell you how we're going to deal, or how we are already dealing in many cases with the climate change process. So one more, we need a vaccine for COVID-19. And we are believing that we're about 12 to 18 months away. We're hoping that that's the case. So we're going to inject COVID-19 vaccine here, take care of that little bugger. We also need a vaccine or something similar to that for climate change. And I think we may have something called carbon pricing, which may act much like a vaccine. If we inject that into the economy, we would have an increase in the price of fossil fuels, and which would favor the use of alternative energy sources. And Dana is going to talk a lot more about this in the third presentation. We still have some time for both, but not much. We need to fix both of these disasters and global issues as soon as possible because we don't have much time. So here's a global map of some of the countries that are putting a price on carbon in the green. So some of them are states, some of them are cities, and some of them are countries. So the green areas are ones where we already have some form of carbon pricing in place. But the rest of them are not doing that. And part 3 is going to be given by Dana to talk about the legislative and market-based solutions to climate change. So let's make sure that we take a look at that, and you'll learn a lot by watching Dana's presentation. So I'm going to end with this, a little more trouble here. Here's the COVID peak and bringing that curve down, but behind it, looming behind it, is a much bigger problem, global problem that we can't ignore. It's going to get bigger and bigger. So I'll be happy when this is over. So with that, thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation, and I encourage you to look now at parts 2 and parts 3. Thank you.